Alzheimer's, dementia. Since I'm addressing such sobering topics this morning, I have to start out with one of my favorite jokes. A few couples were getting together to have a good time, and the men were talking about their various restaurant experiences. And so Harry describes a fantastic place where they'd eaten the previous night. "Sounds great," says one of the men. "What's its name?" After thinking for a few seconds, Harry asks, "What's the name of that flower? It's mostly red. Hibiscus?" No, it's not hibiscus. It's really beautiful smelling. "Rose?" Yeah, that's right. And so he shouts across the room to his wife, "Hey, Rose, what's the name of that restaurant we went to last night?" You think that's funny. Once I was listening in on a conversation that Dick was having with my brother-in-law, Russell, and I heard Dick referring to what's-her-face. And I said, "Excuse me, did you just call me what's-her-face?" I haven't forgotten that. He knows it's true, that's why he's not saying anything. Well, I want to tell you this morning how I chose today's topic on memory loss, and I picked it as a result of a challenge that I was given last month, all of us were, at the Festival of Homiletics in Denver. And one of the speakers asked how many of us had been directly affected by someone who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia of any kind. And as you can imagine, a whole sea of hands went up into the air. And then he said, "Then preachers, why aren't you talking about it from the pulpit?" I challenge you to give a sermon on memory loss. Well, here it is, I bit, only to later discover that June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. Did any of you know that? So it's a timely topic. I can remember when I first heard the word Alzheimer's. It was in December of 1972, and I was in a doctor's office. The reason I was there, I was with my parents, was because my father had been talking strangely. When he wanted to refer to his car keys, for example, he didn't call them his keys. He referred to them as the Egyptian, because there was an image of an Egyptian pharaoh on his keychain. He was having significant word loss issues. I remember that the exam itself consisted of the neurologist asking my father questions like, "Do you know what day this is? Do you know the month? Do you know the year? Who's the president?" A strangely painful test. By the appointment's end, my father was given a diagnosis: Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's? How do you spell it? Is there a T in there? I had never heard the word before. And who was Alzheimer anyway? Over the next 9 months, I was to learn the answer to that question and many others as I watched its steady progress. My father died at the age of 69. And what began as something relatively innocuous, like not being able to come up with the word key, was to evolve into something much bigger, a new, unintelligent, and not always appreciated personality. Alzheimer's is a scary diagnosis, no doubt about it. The bad news? During the next 15 years, Maine's population of people with Alzheimer's, age 65 and older, is expected to soar from the present number of 200,000 to 450,000 in the next 15 years. Good news for some is that there seems to be evidence which suggests that people who have had a diagnosis of cancer are less likely to get Alzheimer's. But I haven't had cancer, and because of my father's Alzheimer's and my mother's dementia, I have saved an article which is now yellowed with age. Here it is. It's entitled, "Could I Have Alzheimer's at My Age? How to Tell Typical Memory Loss from Dementia." It's right here. And you can see that I've looked at this article a few times. Reading it always reminds me of that classic road sign, "Caution, falling rocks." What are you going to do about it? What I'm going to do now is to share with you a part of a sermon written by someone who has become, for me, a spiritual mentor. His name is David Hilfiker. He's a PK, a preacher's kid. He graduated from Yale, went to medical school at the University of Minnesota, practiced in Grand Marais, Minnesota, and then moved to Washington, D.C., where he rolled up his sleeves and went to serve the homeless until he couldn't anymore. His story for me is a vivid testimony to today's text when God says to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness." His title, "Watching the Lights Go Out." Here it is. The onset was insidious, but I mark its beginning as the time when I lost a day. I drove down to Virginia to visit a friend in prison. He had been transferred, and this would be my first time seeing him in his new place. While there, I saw the prison chaplain, and I stopped and introduced myself. And he said, "Yes, I remember you. I remember you from your last visit." And I said, "No, this is my first time here. I've never been here before." He insisted that we had met, but I let it pass. And so later I told my friend about what the chaplain had said, to which he responded, "Yes, you were here last December." To this day, I remember nothing about that forgotten trip. He writes, "Alzheimer's is the ending of my life that I most feared. An increasing sense of isolation, family members becoming strangers to me, and my own grandchildren seeing me as a bumbling old man." But then he writes, "To date, that hasn't been the entire story. Paradoxically, these past months have brought me some of the happiest moments in my life. My relationship with friends have become more intimate, and I've been given enormous backing by both my family and my community. Jesus said that he who saves his life will lose it, and he who loses his life will gain it. And one of the truths that this disease has taught me is that hanging on to a particular sense of self causes suffering. Professionally, a big part of my self-image was as someone knowledgeable. I was the doctor, someone who was to have the answers. I was an intellectual. I had insight and made perceptive analyses until I couldn't anymore. And my big learning came in accepting the fact that the self is continually changing, and there is no single self-image that persists throughout life. But clinging or holding fast to an outdated image is a recipe for suffering. The letting go of self has been a great blessing. I learned that I don't need to be the brightest bulb in the room. I never did. Yet paradoxically, right along with the importance of that learning, came my acceptance of the fact that I believe I have an unchanging soul. Wrote one contemporary author, "Is my soul and spirit immune to the ravages of Alzheimer's? I believe it is. Because I am not what I say or what I do or what I remember. I am fundamentally more." Another learning. Much of the good news of Jesus Christ has to do with living in the present. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or what you will drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food and the body more than clothing? Alzheimer's doesn't let you live in the past because you can't remember it anyway. And as to the future, I realized that it wasn't the future that worried me because I have no idea what the future will bring. What worried me was my image of the future, which made me miserable. But now, at this stage of my life, because I am being forced to live in the present, that has become enough for me. Another surprise came in the freedom that Alzheimer's has given me. The freedom from shame and embarrassment. It's strange to me how, in the midst of all of this, I've been given a gift of inner peace. I have learned not to get angry with myself, not to condemn myself or insist that I do better, because I have reached the point where I can finally accept myself as I am and also accept the grace that is given me in the gospel. And then he said, lastly, without qualification, I can say that my relationships with other people have become closer. Recently, I added a week to a planned visit with my children and grandchildren. I did it because I could. And bottom line, I realized that my diagnosis has given me an excuse to just be with them, and in that way to live a more fulfilling life. The support I'm being given by them overwhelms me. I know that as time goes on, it will become much more difficult for those closest to me to have to watch my decline. But I hope they will temper their sorrow by how I experience this disease, which I prefer, by the way, to call an adventure. For me, it might not be so bad as we think. It was Viktor Frankl who wrote, "The last of human freedoms is the ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances." And as long as David Hilfiker has an ounce of freedom left, he's going to use it. And so, whatever befalls, may we believe as the Apostle Paul did, and as David Hilfiker does right now, that God's grace is sufficient, and that it is his power that is made perfect in weakness. Amen.